it's interesting to me that Mike purposefully didn't point out that I was an econ major when I was here, and I think he's trying to disavow up front anything I might say. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I got to say, when Brenda called and asked if I'd do this, one reason that I wanted to do it was because how much I appreciate the Show Me Institute. And to those of you, and I see Rex is here and other people at the Show Me Institute, it's really provided an opportunity to have a civil but fearless discussion about a lot of important issues. I saw Jenny Bukowski, you just had the presentation on criminal justice reform, critical issue but highly charged issue. And so I appreciate this opportunity. Now, I am looking forward to finding out what I'm going to say at the same time you are. And I say that for a couple reasons. First of all, if you're going to have me here and you're going to get up at 7:30 in the morning, I don't want to be boring. I mean, I really don't want to be boring. So one thing I'm going to do is try to keep what I have to say and what I have in my mind to a minimum and spend a lot of time with questions and answers and comments because I want to hear what you have to say. And the other reason is because I've really spent a lot of time, I think Brenda called a few months ago, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to talk about this subject and how to talk about Mizzou and our university and what's happened and where we're going. And I found it difficult to organize my thoughts for a couple reasons. One, I don't want to get hung up on what happened in November 2015 because, frankly, some of what you might think of mistakes weren't really the mistakes. The mistakes, we've made mistakes, but they weren't all the ones you saw. And second of all, there's so much good that's going on right now and there's so much progress being made. I want to talk about that. But the other reason it's difficult to talk about is when you give a speech, and everybody knows this who gives a speech or gives a talk, the first thing you learn is to keep it simple. You got to keep it simple, right? Because simplicity is easier to understand. Or you have to have an organizing narrative. What's the narrative? And what's the narrative you're going to organize around? The problem is when I try to think about keeping simple what's going on today, not just at this university, but in higher ed, and I try to think about talking simply about what happened in November 2015 and what's then, there's nothing simple about it. And when you talk about it simply, then what you forfeit is the truth. I'll give you a perfect example. What are the two narratives we see or we hear about the University of Missouri right now? Narrative one is that the New York Times will print this, just did again, that they like to act like we are a Midwestern area, that we're really not as enlightened as we should be, that there were some difficult problems going on here that we couldn't face, that we put off facing, and as a result, the university paid. That we simply were not enlightened enough. That's narrative one of the New York Times. Now narrative two, and I printed this out over here, narrative two you find in some of the conservative news issues and talks about Mizzou football as a dumpster fire because narrative two is that at the university we let the inmates run the asylum, that we gave in to all of the protests, that it's become this area that's way too liberal to understand what's going on in Missouri, and somehow at the University of Missouri, we have all these godless heathens who are trying to deconstruct Western civilization and Western culture. Now, the problem with those two simple narratives is they can't both be true, can they? Okay? I mean, there's no way. They can't both be true. And the truth is, neither of them are true. They are simple narratives that fit into what some people wanted to advance in their agenda, and we got ourselves caught in the middle. Now, before we go on then and talk about the questions, I would like to say a few things about how it is we did get caught in the middle, and some issues that I hope that we've learned from and that we're going to continue to learn from. And the first one is the importance of leadership. People have different views of history and organizing principles of history. I believe in the great man theory. I believe that individuals make a difference, that people with courage and clarity and leadership make a difference to history. And I think that has made and will make a difference to the University of Missouri. But at this particular time, and this is not to talk too much about what was done wrong or not done, at this particular time, We simply had a lack of leadership. One of the things that people tend to believe is that the board had something to do with the president's resignation. How many here think the board had anything to do with the president's resignation? One. The board had nothing to do with the president's resignation. We were called up to a special meeting. I was sitting there at the meeting when the president announced his resignation. I had no idea it was coming. I looked to the side of me at Ann Covington. She had no idea it was coming. Marcy Graham, who's currently board chairman, had no idea it was coming. That decision to resign was a personal decision. He was in no way forced out by the board. Now, the second part of the narrative, and I'm reading from the New York Times right here, is that the riots caused the campus chancellor to resign, Bowen Lofton. Again, totally factually inaccurate. The resignation and decision to step down by Bowen Lofton had nothing to do with the protests at that time. It was a product of a letter written by the deans, which I think was a very unfortunate failure of leadership, frankly, on the dean's part to get involved at that chaotic time in the university, but a letter written by the deans, which had nothing to do with the protests. It had to do more, I think, with the need that we have to centralize resources and financial resources and make some hard decisions. That's why Bowen Lofton stepped down. But yet that narrative has continued and has been, I think, a real part of the problem that we have, and it was caused because we didn't have a leader in place who could do two things. To one, tell the simple truth as to how it happened. For some reason, that was obfuscated. No one wanted to stand up and say, this is why Bowen Lofton resigned, this is why the president resigned, and by the way, the University of Missouri is not a racist campus. That was my biggest disappointment. I brought with me, I left in the car, I wanted to make sure I was right, so I printed out the press clippings that I had saved from December of 2016, which are about that thick. And I looked through those press clippings. At no time did I find any leader of the university make the simple declaratory statement, this is not a racist institution. And when you think back at that, that simple failure is another reason that these dual narratives have been allowed to exist and to continue on. The other issue is, and then I want to go on to the future, is the idea that the football team, you know, ESPN had a I think, 30-minute presentation on how this football team was groundbreaking and how that affected the entire university. I can tell you, I was in those meetings. When I found out the football team was protesting, I never gave it a second thought. I didn't even think about it. Nor did any other curator ever even mention it to me. From my perspective, it was very clear they were either going to play the football game or the coach wouldn't have a job, which is what happened, I think, at University of Minnesota. But the idea, again, that this somehow drove decision-making is just a false narrative, again, because of the lack of leadership in that nobody was willing to stand up as a leader and say, this isn't what happened. As you pointed out, one of the speakers we had was Ben Shapiro. Now, to put that into context, when Ben Shapiro spoke at the University of California, they threatened to shut down the speech. Then I hear they spent $600,000 or something on security. They had to cordon off where he was speaking. There were massive protests outside. Ben Shapiro spoke at the University of Missouri, and how many of you even knew that? A few of you. There were no protests. He was not shouted down. He was able to give a speech in a very civilized manner, a pretty controversial speech, frankly, by the way, if you've ever listened to it, pretty edgy, and we had a very thoughtful debate on it. Is it Kirsten or Kristen Powers? Fox News has spoke here. We've had conservative political figures speak here. Angela Davis, who, an avowed communist, spoke here again. There weren't any protests. Nobody shut it down. Brian Stevenson, who, a remarkable book, Just Mercy, by the way, but is very active in both criminal justice reform and some controversial issues regarding the death penalty, spoke here. Went fine. It was a well-attended, straightforward conversation. That is the University of Missouri that I know. The University of Missouri that I know and that I think everyone should know is a university that has adopted the Chicago free speech principles, but not only adopted those Chicago free speech principles, has put them into place time and time and time again on this campus without disruption or violence or protest. Now, I would ask, where's the coverage of that been in the New York Times? But I haven't seen it. The other important thing before we get to about leadership that I want to talk about, though, is humility, and the importance of humility and the importance of listening in leadership. When we talk about the mistakes that have been made at the university, and we're not the only university that's made this mistake, if someone was going to tell me what is your biggest mistake at a university, I would say we have failed to be humble. Because humble people listen, and they hear what's going on around them, and they understand what their relation is with the people of the community and the people of the state. Now, one of the things about the university, which is not always easy to understand, and I think we have to respect it, is what is called in the university area as shared governance. And it's a critical part of a university setting. You know, everybody has their own concerns about what really matters to people, why the university does the thing the way it does. I have two real concerns. My libertarian comes out, so you'll see it. One is, I really don't like authoritarianism. I mean, I really don't like authoritarianism. I believe the best decisions are made collaboratively. I believe the best decisions are made with people who don't always agree. You know, I think there's a left-right spectrum right now that sometimes criticize juries. I love juries, and the reason I love juries is because you have these people who don't agree or even know each other when they go into the jury box, and they learn to work together to get to the truth. I believe in collaboration. I don't like authoritarianism. Part of the reason the university is the way it is and is set up the way it is to combat the authoritarianism that I think all of us tend to be concerned about. Now, the other thing I don't like is groupthink. I mean, how many of you know what I'm talking about, groupthink? I mean, don't you see it sometimes, and doesn't it just drive you nuts? If you want to watch groupthink sometime, I shouldn't admit to this, you'll quit listening to me. How many of you ever watched Morning Joe on MSNBC? And they start agreeing with each other, and they keep agreeing, and they say the most inane things, and you think, how in God's name do they not realize what idiots they are sounding like? And then you realize because they're all agreeing with each other. That's part of why the university is the way it is to avoid groupthink. You know, I will say if I could diverge a little bit, and you worry about some of these weaponized words now, like diversity. You know, diversity has become weaponized, so we don't really talk about it in the way we should. But at the commanding general at Fort Leonard Wood, who's a brilliant man, gave a speech the other day and he talked about bifocalism, which is actually a recognized thing in the psychological literature, I am told. I haven't read it, but bifocalism, which is that you need to see things from different perspectives at different times and in different ways. And if you get the people together who can see things with different perspectives and in different ways, you can actually get to better results. There's a lot of business literature on it. There's a Harvard Business Review, but there's a lot of business reviews on this. How, again, your best decisions are made not just by collaboration, but your best decisions are made by collaboration between people who don't always have a lot in common and who don't always agree. And so part of what we've tried to do at the university, which I think has been misunderstood, is to create that sort of learning environment. And frankly, a lot of the efforts we've made to increase diversity, gender diversity, race diversity, have been the right thing to do. The unfortunate thing is that I think the protests actually, and some of the things that have been done on that stage have actually set us back. But when people think that our mistake has been because we got too caught up in diversity, I'll just tell you, I disagree. I think that is a critical part of what a university does and how a university learns, and we got to be better at it, not worse. But we also have to, and I go back to listening to the state of Missouri. You know, part of what I think made the University of Missouri so great for so long was a really bond between the people of Missouri and this state, and the willingness of the people of Missouri to support this institution while it would be bringing in scholars from other areas and be teaching new things and new research. Two things happened. One, there was a financial issue that happened. And this was a decision made both at Jeff City in a couple different ways. The amount of public support of higher education, not just in this state, but in a lot of states, has really declined. And it's declined for a lot of reasons. I frankly think the main reason it's declined has been because of the increase in Medicaid payments and health care payments. There's only so much money in the budget, and it's a zero-sum game. The other thing that the General Assembly did was put in Missouri a really draconian tuition cap on us. Are you all aware of the tuition cap that we have at the University of Missouri? I know the students are. In the University of Missouri, or in Missouri, they passed a statute that not only limits tuition, there's other states that do it, like Colorado, I think it's 5 or 6%, but limits it to the CPI, which has been infinitesimal. And we want to keep education affordable, but it has really not allowed us to be as flexible as we need on pricing education. For example, engineering. It costs a lot more to educate an engineer. The labs cost more, the professors cost more. A business school, it costs more money to run a business school. We need to do what other states have done and do what's called differential tuition, or pay different amounts for different tuitions, but we haven't been able to do so because of the tuition cap. Now here's where I'm going to with listening. How did that happen? And what did that lead to? As a result, Missouri quit its recruiting efforts throughout the state in areas that we've always recruited in. There were those of us on the board of curators who could not understand why we didn't have recruiters more in southern Missouri, which frankly, let's be honest, where the political power has gone in Missouri. Why have we quit recruiting national merit scholars, which I hope we're going to start again? And it is because Illinois was so high priced and their students were so high priced that a conscious decision was made to spend more time and effort to bring those students in who could pay out-of-state tuition here and still be cheaper than their in-state tuition. So it looked like a good buy, and it makes sense from an economic point of view. The problem is the unforeseen circumstances is that gradually over time we lost our connection to much of Missouri. As the students from different areas of Missouri started choosing different schools because we were not expressing enough interest in them, and we lost our connection with those students and their parents. Lo and behold, we lost our connection with some of the legislators. And so, as a result, when things happened in November 15th, we were in somewhat of a tenuous position. I think that lack of humility over a decade period of time, and listening to the people of Missouri and listening to the Missouri legislature, is what led us to be in such a tenuous position when things went wrong. We had become a fragile institution because we were too insular and we were not humble. Finally, I want to talk, and I'm talking a lot longer than I wanted to. Am I boring you all yet? Because if I'm boring you, just got to say, you're boring us, and we'll move on to something else. I want to talk a little bit about communication, because this is, if there had ever been a real failure, it has been on our inability to communicate and tell our story. And again, this is not just this school. What happens in higher ed, because of shared governance, because of the way it works, because of the departments and the diffuse authority, administrators and leaders spend a lot of time talking to each other. Remember what I said about groupthink? And they spend a lot of time listening to each other. And the time they spend talking to each other and the time they spend listening to each other is not time that they're able to listen to the people of Missouri and listen to the legislators. And again, we have to learn that there are a variety of different ways to communicate. There are internal communications that are critical to running an institution. You can't have a great university if you don't have great faculty and great staff, and it takes a lot of communication to both explain to them why you're doing some things the way you're doing them, to recruit them. Your best recruiters for new faculty is your faculty. So you have to be communicating. But you also have to communicate with McDonald County. You have to communicate with St. Louis and Ferguson, and you have to communicate with northern Missouri. And all of these places in Missouri, we've got what? Everybody want to say 4 states? I think it's more like 5 or 6 different states in the state of Missouri. So you've got the internal communications, and you have communications where saying the exact same thing in one area of the state, like the Central West End, makes them think you're narrow-minded. Why do we want to send our kids there? And you say the exact same thing that they think makes us narrow-minded in Butler County and Poplar Bluff, and they think, my God, they've lost their minds. Why would I want to send my kids here? So the communication that an institution like Missouri has is really complicated. And so when people want to ask, why are you spending $300,000 on Edelman? Why are you spending $1.27 million on 160 over 90 to market and to brand? That's because that's an investment. You can look at it as an expense. That's an investment. That's an investment to get our communication strategy right, to learn to communicate with everybody in the state so that our administration and people like Dr. Choi, who's brilliant, but he hasn't been in the state of Missouri that long, can learn what drives the different areas of the state. To me, we are late to the game getting 160 over 90 and spending that $1.3 million. You know, if you want to talk about some great institutions and their success, look at Texas A&M. They already have them hired for more than we did. Look at the University of Wisconsin. They already have them hired. Look at Duke. They already have them hired. So I've received a little pushback saying if you don't have money and you've got these layoffs, why are you spending money? We're spending money to learn to communicate. We're spending money to learn how to listen. We're spending money to learn the concerns, and we're spending money so that we can have people who really understand how to talk to these different areas of the state teach us that. And there's nothing phony about that. That's communication. We haven't done enough of it at the University of Missouri. So anyway, that went on longer than I thought. That's kind of my spiel. I can prattle on more, but I'd really rather talk about what you all want to talk about and answer questions and comments. So I'll pick on somebody if you don't raise your hands and volunteer. Jenny? Oh, there, Bob. Okay. Actually, not only do I, but in fact, Moon Choi has been to Purdue to meet with Mitch Daniels, and other people from this university have been looking at Purdue. You know, the interesting thing is, Purdue's done some really groundbreaking things. You know, there's another school that, from my perspective, has really figured out how to disengage from the old way of doing things, and that's Arizona State, which has managed. Purdue had a few advantages. One, they're basically an engineering school, which is, in today's era of STEM, helps. Purdue actually got an increase in state aid from the state legislature, which helped. Purdue also increased enrollment, which is what we have to do, which has helped. But at Arizona State, what they did was make some fundamental decisions, which is to disengage from the old way of doing things, which is that you had to either have rigor and be selective, or you had to be an institution that is open to everybody. Now I want you to think about that, and what an old way of doing things that is, Bob. The idea that to be a great institution, you have to turn people away who need education. That's the old way of thinking. What we have to do is both make ourselves more accessible, keep our affordability, and yet build these areas of excellence, which I think Moon is the perfect guy to do. And I'll tell you, we've got some plans in the work that I think are going to be really transformational. I hope I'm not giving, the TPMC is public knowledge, isn't it, Rhonda? Yeah, that we're talking about it. Right now, and I'm hoping that we do this fairly soon as board action, we have plans made for a translational precision medicine building, which is not just the medicine and the research, because we have a nuclear reactor, we have a med school, we have a vet school, we have a law school, we have all these things, we have entrepreneurship, we have a guy named Turpin. How many of you have met Mr. Turpin? Brilliant guy who is starting up an entrepreneur spin-off facility at Missouri which if we help him and cooperate with him will be second to none. And an entrepreneurship legal clinic. We have everything we need here to not only provide that basic research, but also to translate it into the real world, into saving lives, into spin-off companies, into making money. What we haven't got right now is the facility. And Moon Choi actually, one of the reasons I think the board was so attracted to his hiring, did a very similar thing at UConn. He started up what was there a manufacturing facility because he knew how to put it together and knit the pieces together on the financing. I expect the board to be dealing with the financing very shortly. I hope in November. Rhonda, you'll be ready in November, right?
Always ready.
Those of you who don't know, Rhonda is the CFO here at the Mizzou campus. I expect to approve that, and I think that is why Moon Choi is here, to provide that sort of transformative opportunity which allows us to do the research in an affordable way, in a way that makes education more affordable, more accessible, but more rigorous. And that's the secret today. The secret is how to get more academic rigor while not becoming less affordable or less accessible. And I think Moon Choi is the guy who can knit that together, not only like Mitch Daniels has, but how it's been done at Arizona State. That was a very long answer to a short question. Yes, sir. That is an excellent question. So I'm going to actually go over here because he has brought up one of my favorite issues that I want to talk about. One of the things that we have to do at the University of Missouri is be willing to take charge and make those decisions and take accountability for them. The University of Missouri has, let's say, I'll just call it the board here and the president. And then we have this theory that there are these 4 campuses with their own chancellors and their own leadership and their own faculty. Now somewhere, despite the fact that the collective rules that we have state clearly this is supposed to be one university, somewhere we've come up with the idea, and it filtered into everything that was done for a while, which you identified, that somehow this is the system. And it's a back office operation, but these are the campuses, and they get to run themselves. And somehow, and I don't know how it happened, because you're really getting me on my pet peeve, if you've been to any university things, you have seen it talk about the University of Missouri system, not University of Missouri, but University of Missouri system, which to me is just code word by academics for you're not the boss of me. One of the things, and this is why I'm glad you brought that up, because you brought up the right question that happened, is there became a culture. And it was a board culture, and it was a university culture, that the board was somewhat of hands-off, and that we had to leave it up to the academics to make the decisions. Now, I believe in shared governance, and I believe in listening, and I believe in collaboration. But I also believe that the buck stops here, and that decisions have to be made. And you can get back, and I appreciated what Mike said about Melissa Click. I don't know, we're actually on probation right now from some trade organization called the AAUP or something like that, because we made that decision. In a rigorous university, I believe, that the university faculty would take ownership. And I will say, even to my friends on the other side, that I was disappointed that the university faculty did not take ownership and leadership under those collected rules for what I clearly thought was a misuse of authority. But when they didn't, the Board of Curators stepped in. I think that has started 2 things. I think that has started, one, I believe the new board we have is very active. I think that there are people from the university here today that when I'm not listening will get you in a corner and say, yeah, they're micromanaging, they're a little over the top. And that may happen from time to time. But the culture had become such that there was no clear distinction and leadership. Now, we have a lot of decisions to make that are going to require that leadership. We still have to distinguish between the 4 campuses. I don't understand personally why we have allowed this idea that the tuition should basically be the same everywhere, why every institution has to have the same programs, why every institution has to have their own collected rules and regulations on faculty responsibility. The board's going to have to step in. It's going to be very controversial. There will be people in this room, I'm looking at you over there, who aren't going to like some of the decisions made, but I'm glad you brought that up because I don't see how the University of Missouri goes on to greatness until it starts becoming the University of Missouri with 4 campuses and not a University of Missouri system, which is a back office operation with 4 independent contractors. I will say, to show you that it matters when you step in, and I don't know how many of you have known this, but does anybody here know Dean LeBoa, Elizabeth LeBoa? Brilliant, brilliant leader. Dean LeBoa removed a tenured faculty this year. It is the first time that anybody in the university that I've talked to can remember a tenured faculty being removed. And so again, I think that this goes again to your question that when you start exercising leadership and when the board starts exercising its role, that it encourages and empowers people like Dean LeBoa to exercise theirs. So I think you ask an excellent question. We got a long way to go. We have a long way to go, and it's going to be a lot of hashing out. We're doing right now a program review, top to bottom, on all the campuses, as to what is going to stay and what's not going to stay, what serves our needs, what doesn't serve our needs, what is financially viable and what isn't. And when that gets going, you wait and watch. There'll be enormous pressure on the board to not act. How many of you remember Barbara Ewing in Scope and Course? I don't know if you all remember, but the board is who sold Barbara out. Barbara did what she was told needed to be done and what would have put us ahead of the curve at the University of Missouri instead of behind the curve at making decisions on what programs should be kept and what programs should be eliminated, and the Board of Curators at that time yielded to the political pressure from the campuses. So we're going to have a big test coming up because the program review is going to come up with major changes. We have to do those changes. And then we're going to find out whether we're really, as you said, whether we're going to say you're wrong, or whether we're going to take the heat. I think we got a good board. I think we'll take the heat. Great question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
David, this is very good, insightful. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to put on your psychologist hat for a moment here. To me, at the end of all this, in November 2015, it struck me that Tim Wolf was in the full throes of Stockholm Syndrome. And, in retrospect, I don't even think it's retrospect, it was obvious, stand up to what needs to be done. The head football coach needs to be directed to play football, let the players take a leave of absence, whatever. But he kind of buckled, it fell apart. Why the meltdown? And then, did you have any insight to this coming? Could anybody in the curator said, look, you may not be liked by the faculty, you may need to go, but you're not going to go right now. There's a way things are done. So I guess. Well,
I would say, let me say several things on this. And some of this is somewhat sensitive because I'm going to say some things that could be taken as critical of Tim. I think Tim is a good man. I think he was ill-suited to be president of a university because if there is one thing that the president of a university needs, it is very, very thick skin. And that just wasn't Tim. And I think that the protests and the protests being directed at Tim really affected him personally. I am told by people who are friends of his, he literally did not sleep for a week and a half after the protest. And all of us know what sleep deprivation means. I think that Tim I don't think he understood higher ed, really. I don't think he understood the very rough give and take of managing an institution of higher ed with shared governance and tenured faculty that has strong opinions and that has very diverse viewpoints. And when you added all that together, I just think that he just frankly collapsed. I have been told he did not make that decision. I think our board meeting was at 9. I drove up that morning I am told he didn't make that decision until like 5 o'clock that morning to resign. I don't know if that's accurate. That's what I've been told. So in answer to your question is individuals make a difference. And it doesn't mean he's a bad guy. It means he was not the right person to be in that circumstance at that time. I think any member of the board, and I will tell you, I'll be quite honest because I don't want to be phony about this, I didn't think that Tim Wolf was a good president. I had made up my mind in the year that I had been on the board that he was just not suited to be president of a higher ed institution. But that doesn't mean he's a bad person. But every curator, including myself, would have said, you cannot resign. But again, here's what happened. We didn't even know he was going to resign. The resignation was made in front of a press conference. We got shuttled back into a back room. At that time, Tim said, you've got to force Bowen Lofton to step down. We've got all the deans on the campus saying Bowen Lofton has to step down. So that's where the curators, we made our mistake. We got bum rushed into a decision. Whether Bowen should have stayed or not is a whole other issue. I actually think Bowen was a little better than he's given credit for. But Tim melted down, but then frankly, I think we melted down a little bit. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So there's some hard decisions that are going to be coming down the pike. Can you lay out kind of in a broad sense what you think is the vision that will make the University of Missouri competitive with top 30 campuses, top 50 campuses across the country?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't have all the answers because we got to get you guys to agree with us on some things, but because that's the way it works. The first thing is I really think that we have a multiplicity of programs that we are going to have to eliminate. We simply cannot be all things to everybody at this campus or every other campus, and that's going to cause some heat. So what those are, frankly, that's going to start with the faculty. The faculty is going to weigh in. Then we may or may not agree with them, but the faculty is going to weigh in. And we're going to have to eliminate some programs. Second of all, which we're already doing, we're going to have to not only eliminate the administrators we've eliminated, but we're going to have to eliminate more administration. I used to go, when I was on the board, and listen to how lean we are administratively. That's bunk. There is no question that we've got too many administrators, that we still need to flatten our organizational chart. Now, Moon, let me say this. I don't want to act like it's not happening. We are doing a lot to flatten the organizational chart. At MU Health, you've gone from a CEO, COO, vice chancellor, 3 people, all of them very high paid, to 1 person. And it's working fine, which shows you that maybe the organizational chart needed to be worked on. We've gotten rid of the vice chancellor of public affairs. On this campus, Rhonda, correct me if I'm wrong, but we merged the student affairs and operations into one department under Gary Ward. So again, this tends to be our highest paid people, and we've taken that organizational chart and merged 2 spots into 1. So we're going to have to continue doing that. And none of that is easy. Nobody likes to see some of the people laid off that are laid off. Nobody likes to see people lose their job, but the truth is we've got to flatten the organizational chart. Then, and this is an easy thing to say but hard to do, we have to get faculty salary up. I mean, faculty is a competitive thing. You have to recruit faculty. You have to recruit great researchers. It's not going to do us a bit of good to spend $150 million or whatever we're going to spend on this translational precision medicine building if we can't recruit world-class people to come here. World-class people, it's not just their salary, the startup costs, the lab costs, it takes money, so we're going to have to reallocate. I will say again, I want you all to be aware of how much is happening. The budget shortfall was $60 million. There's been $100 million cut out. There's more to be cut out. $100 million was cut out so that $40 million of that could be reallocated, and we're waiting. Some of it's been reallocated. We're waiting for some decisions and some input and collaboration from the faculty on programs. But that's what I think. I think my vision for this campus is leaner, less administration, fewer programs, spend the money where you need to spend the money. Jenny. To show you that it can be repaired, Moon Choi, and I don't think Tim ever did this, drove down to the Senate caucus talked to the Senate caucus, and Dan called and told me he hit an absolute home run. That's what it takes to repair it. You've got to get out there, you've got to talk to them, you've got to have relationships. Yes, I think it is not only repairable, I think it is rapidly, here's the animus was really just like a bad breakup. That's what it was. I mean, I to this day don't think that the legislature, the University of Missouri, doesn't like the University, or legislature of Missouri doesn't like the University of Missouri. I think they love the University of Missouri. But we kind of slapped them in the face and said we're going out with somebody else. And we're kind of trying to get it back a little bit. Aaron, I think you'll like my answer. When people ask, why are you conservative? It's very simple to me. I believe in market incentives. I think we got to start directing the money. I think the money got diffuse on this campus. I still think we're trying to collect it all. I think we have very significant changes to make to where we have more control over the allocation of resources and where that money goes. And this is something, Rex, that Jeannie has talked to me about for 3 years now. And when she got on the commission, she talks about this. We are going to have to incentivize the faculty and departments that are successful. And success can be measured in a number of ways. It doesn't all have to be research. It can be teaching more classes. It can be more student hours. We're going to have to make the decisions to incentivize those faculty and those departments that add more to the success of the University of Missouri. And there is going to be caterwauling like you've never heard in your life. But if we're going to be a great institution, that's what we're going to have to do.
You've got one more question, so save it up for a good one.
You got a good one, Steve?
I think so.
Two things, if I can remember to address both of them. I want to go first to the importance we have of dealing with tuition in an upfront way. We currently use fees as sort of a method of differential pricing, but I am told it doesn't work. Parents don't like it. It's not transparent. Financial aid is hard to negotiate. So again, we need enough flexibility within the law so that we can let the market drive the pricing on the different elements or different schools and departments in the state. Now, second of all, what you're saying is very interesting. If you were to talk about states with great higher education right now, how many of you would say Georgia? Not a one of you. You would. Georgia is a remarkable success in higher ed, and it has driven the success of that entire state. I was recently down there, and I was with one of the board of regents, if I met in a different way, of Georgia, where they have the whole state, but he's a businessman, and he gives a lot to the sympathy down there, very active in Atlanta. And I said, what's the success? How has Georgia, part of the Deep South, made this remarkable game? You've got Atlanta, which is bringing in Fortune 500 companies right after left. It is an amazing success story. Had the Olympics. You have economic development throughout the state, outstate, and Atlanta, in areas like Columbus and Augusta. And I said, what did it? He says, in his opinion, real simple. It's called the Georgia Hope Scholarship, which really did what you're talking about. What the Georgia Hope Scholarship did was for students in Georgia who can get accepted. They could take that money as high achievers. It's a full ride. As it goes down, it can be a half ride, depending on the grades in the area. And they could take that, and they could take it to whatever school would accept them. So if you're a high achieving student at Georgia and you want to go to Georgia Tech, one of the great engineering schools in the world, you're a high achiever, you can go there. Tuition's covered. If you want to go to the University of Georgia, which has passed us, unfortunately, over the last 20 years in the rankings of public universities, you can get accepted, you're a high achiever, you can go there. There's a political leader in Jeff City who is an alum of this school, and we've talked about this school a lot, and his daughter's at Arkansas. I said, why is your daughter at Arkansas, not at Mizzou? Because that individual's daughter, as a high achiever, could go to Arkansas cheaper than she could go to Mizzou because they had financial aid. Both this school, this university, higher ed in this state, and the legislature are going to have to come to grips with exactly what you said. If we want our students to stay in this state, and we want them to build this state, we want them to grow this state, and we want to do some of the things that other states like Georgia have done, we're going to have to figure out a way to keep them at school here. And they're going to follow the money.
So let me just start by saying thanks for David for